For nearly a century, the Western world has lived inside an illusion. The illusion that growth can be infinite, that wealth can expand forever, and that progress can be manufactured by confidence alone. From Wall Street to Silicon Valley, the belief has been that as long as there is innovation, credit, and demand, the system will renew itself endlessly. But this belief was built not on reality, but on a fragile trust that money itself creates value. The West became addicted to the feeling of prosperity rather than the discipline of production. The economy turned into a performance, a spectacle of numbers, forecasts, and charts that hide the fact that the foundation beneath is slowly eroding. Every skyscraper, every booming stock market, every new wave of consumer optimism has been fueled less by real creation and more by the machinery of debt and speculation. In the early decades of industrialization, growth meant factories, workers, machines, and physical output. Wealth was tangible: steel, ships, railways, and oil. It was a time when value was measured by what you could build, not by what you could promise. But as economies matured, they sought faster returns and lighter labor production, moved offshore, while finance and consumption took center stage. The Western economies began to evolve into service and knowledge-based systems. Yet they failed to realize one crucial truth. When you separate consumption from creation, you begin the countdown to decline. A nation cannot live on design while another builds. It cannot lead in ideas if it stops manufacturing the reality behind those ideas. The illusion of endless growth was strengthened by decades of monetary expansion. Whenever the system stumbled, in 1987, in 2000, in 2008, and again in 2020, the solution was the same: inject liquidity, lower rates, print more money, and hope that optimism will return. This cycle trains societies to believe that risk doesn't matter and that the market always recovers. But recovery without reform is just delay. Instead of fixing the structural weaknesses, excessive consumption, hollowed industries, rising inequality, policymakers inflated a balloon that kept getting larger, shinier, and more fragile. What looked like strength was actually dependency. The West became rich on the illusion of stability created by central banks rather than the genuine health of its industries. Credit became the new oxygen. Companies borrowed to buy back shares instead of investing in innovation. Governments borrowed to fund consumption instead of education or infrastructure. Families borrowed to maintain lifestyles that wages could no longer support. This dependence on credit created a false sense of prosperity, a calm before an inevitable correction. When too much of an economy is built on borrowing, not producing, it transforms into a pyramid standing on air. Every generation inherits not wealth, but obligation. The illusion thrives until the interest bill arrives, and when it does, it breaks everything built upon it. There was also a shift in mindset, the idea that wealth could be created by manipulating information rather than producing value. Financial engineering. The brightest minds who once would have built machines, discovered materials, or improved logistics were now designing derivatives, algorithms, and marketing campaigns. The spirit of creation was replaced by the strategy of speculation. Stock prices became the scoreboard of progress, and the market became the mirror of national pride. But you cannot eat share prices, and you cannot sustain an economy on the illusion of value created by digital numbers that can vanish overnight. Technology accelerated this illusion. The rise of the internet and digital platforms gave birth to trillion-dollar companies that promised infinite scalability and zero marginal cost. Growth seemed boundless because the digital world had no physical limits. Yet, even this model relies on consumption, on attention, data, and advertising, not on the production of material goods. The West mistook digital dominance for economic dominance. It forgot that behind every digital product, there must still be a world that builds the hardware, mines the minerals, assembles the devices, and ships the goods. When you outsource those layers of reality, you may still own the software, but you lose control over survival. As Western economies pushed for financial globalization, they exported manufacturing and imported debt. This created a paradox. Wealth appeared to grow domestically, but the substance of that wealth was being created elsewhere. The true productivity, the act of transforming resources into usable products, was shifting to countries willing to work longer, save more, and invest in the future rather than consume in the present. The illusion of endless growth made policymakers arrogant and complacent. They believed that the system was self-correcting, that innovation alone could offset deficits, and that dominance was permanent. History, however, has always punished such assumptions. The core issue is psychological as much as economic. The illusion of growth feeds on the human tendency to believe in continuity, the comfort that tomorrow will be just like today, only better. But growth cannot defy gravity forever. When consumption outpaces creation, when wealth creation depends on the next interest rate cut, when industries become financial games rather than social engines, the system becomes unsustainable. Western wealth, once built on craftsmanship and innovation, has turned into a financial mirage maintained by perception. And perception, once broken, cannot be repaired by another policy announcement. Every empire in history believed its prosperity was permanent. The Romans debased their currency. The Spanish inflated their empire with gold. The British extended their credit too far. Each time, the illusion of eternal wealth blinded leaders to the decay underneath. The Western world today stands at a similar threshold, rich in data but poor in discipline, abundant in consumption but hollow in production, surrounded by luxury but weakened in purpose. The illusion of endless growth is seductive because it rewards short-term vision. But the price of illusion is always long-term collapse. The current model, where demand is fueled by debt and profits are inflated by speculation, is not sustainable because it extracts value faster than it creates it. In this illusion, success is celebrated, but sustainability is ignored. Economies are measured by how fast they grow, not by how deeply they build. The obsession with quarterly profits has erased the wisdom of generational wealth, the kind built slowly with patience, innovation, and purpose. The Western world once understood this when it rebuilt after war, when it invested in education, infrastructure, and science. But somewhere along the way, it replaced the vision of creation with the convenience of consumption. The illusion of endless growth has now reached its limit, and the cracks are visible in every market, every currency, every social system that depended on it. For centuries, economic power has followed one invisible rule: productivity determines destiny. The wealthiest nations have always been the most productive ones, those that could turn raw materials into value, labor into innovation, and vision into tangible creation. For a long time, that center of productivity was the West. From the Industrial Revolution to the post-war boom, the Western world was the beating heart of manufacturing, technology, and global trade. But over the last 40 years, that heart has been slowly transplanted. The pulse of productivity now beats elsewhere. The world's factories, data hubs, logistics corridors, and digital marketplaces have migrated eastward quietly and decisively. The balance of global wealth is shifting not through politics or ideology, but through the raw force of creation itself. The West once led by building railways, ships, machinery, energy grids, and systems that defined civilization. It understood that true power came from controlling both production and distribution. Yet as prosperity grew, so did complacency. The pursuit of efficiency replaced the pursuit of resilience. Companies chased cheaper labor instead of smarter processes. They moved their manufacturing across oceans, believing they could retain control through design, branding, and finance. What they didn't realize was that every factory closed, every skill forgotten, and every supply chain outsourced was a quiet transfer of power. Productivity is not an abstract concept. It is the backbone of sovereignty. When you no longer produce what you consume, you become dependent on those who do. In the last 3 decades, this dependence has become irreversible. The East did not just accept the West's outsourced industries, it mastered them. Nations invested in education, infrastructure, and technology with a discipline that mirrored the industrial rise of the 19th century. They built ports that operate 24 hours a day, factories that integrate robotics and AI, and logistics systems that move goods faster than the old industrial powers could imagine. The West celebrated globalization, believing it was in control of the rules. But globalization is not static. It rewards those who build, not those who buy. The more the West imported, the stronger its suppliers became. The more capital flowed outward, the more capability flowed inward into regions that had once been dismissed as developing. Meanwhile, Western economies shifted focus from production to consumption, from invention to investment. The rise of financialization turned profits into paper, assets into speculation, and innovation into branding. Productivity became a statistic rather than a philosophy. While factories in Asia were producing goods, Western boardrooms were producing strategies to extract value from capital markets. This asymmetry widened year after year. The world's supply chains became both the arteries and the vulnerabilities of the global economy. When one region controls the making of things and another controls only the selling of them, the outcome is inevitable. Influence follows production. Today, the East controls not only manufacturing, but also the digital and logistical infrastructure that supports it. The ports, ships, and rail networks that keep global trade alive are increasingly managed by nations that think in decades, not quarters. Data centers, 5G networks, and payment systems are being built where labor and leadership align. In contrast, Western economies debate taxation, regulation, and political theater while their industrial base continues to shrink. The discussion about values and climate may be noble, but without productivity, even noble ideas lose their force. Prosperity cannot be legislated. It must be manufactured. The most striking part of this shift is its invisibility to the average citizen. A smartphone designed in California is assembled in Shenzhen, powered by chips fabricated in Taiwan, and shipped through ports managed by Eastern logistics giants. The West still owns the brand, but not the process. It holds the patents, but not the production lines. This gap between ownership and capability is the silent fracture of the modern world economy. When crisis comes, whether through war, pandemic, or inflation, ownership means little without control over creation. The nations that make, move, and distribute hold the true power, not those that simply design and sell. This transformation has also revealed the difference between speed and stability. Western economies have mastered speed, fast profits, fast innovation cycles, fast consumption. But Eastern economies have mastered stability, long-term planning, disciplined saving, and patient reinvestment. While Western consumers chase convenience, Eastern producers build endurance. That difference in philosophy is why factories never stop humming in the East, even when markets crash elsewhere. It is why supply chains can be redirected within weeks, while policy changes in the West take years of debate. Productivity is not just about output, it's about adaptability, precision, and endurance. A generation ago, many believed that automation would return manufacturing power to the West. Robots, AI, and digital tools were expected to level the playing field. But technology does not favor geography. It favors efficiency. Those who can integrate it fastest, cheapest, and most effectively will win. The East understood this truth before anyone else. It adopted automation not to replace workers, but to amplify them. It built entire ecosystems around manufacturing, education, logistics, finance, and research, all interconnected in a single rhythm. The West, in contrast, treated automation as a cost-cutting measure, not a nation-building tool. The difference in intention created the difference in outcome. The shift of global productivity is not just economic, it is cultural. It reflects values, work ethic, long-term thinking, collective discipline, and the ability to sacrifice short-term comfort for future gain. The Western world once possessed these traits during its industrial rise, but decades of comfort eroded them. Productivity requires discomfort, the willingness to improve, to compete, to outwork and outthink. When societies become accustomed to entitlement rather than effort, they lose the creative tension that drives progress. The East, still hungry for progress, carries that tension within every innovation, every policy, every decision. This quiet shift has reshaped geopolitics as well. Influence today is measured not by armies, but by supply chains. Economic alliances are being redrawn around trade corridors, resource routes, and digital platforms. Nations that can produce at scale dictate the terms of cooperation. Nations that depend on imports must negotiate from weakness. The West once dictated global trade. Now it must navigate a world where its consumers depend on producers it no longer controls. That is the reality of 21st century economics. Productivity is the new weapon, and efficiency is the new diplomacy. The numbers tell the story more clearly than any speech could. The majority of global manufacturing output now comes from Asia. The world's largest ports, busiest cargo routes, and fastest growing e-commerce platforms are based there. Research and development spending in key industries, semiconductors, renewable energy, artificial intelligence, is increasingly led by nations once considered imitators. The imitators have become innovators, and the innovators are now struggling to compete with their own creation. This is not a temporary imbalance. It is the beginning of a structural transformation that will define the next century. The shift of global productivity represents more than just an economic realignment. It is a philosophical awakening, a reminder that wealth follows work, that power follows production, and that stability follows discipline. The nations that still believe they can maintain dominance through consumption, marketing, and monetary policy are living in yesterday's world. The new economy rewards those who make, not those who speculate. The true empires of the future will be built not in boardrooms, but in factories, labs, and digital infrastructures that produce real, measurable value every single day. Every empire in decline hides behind the illusion of control. And today that illusion is debt. The modern Western economy runs not on productivity or creation, but on credit, a silent addiction that has reshaped societies, distorted values, and chained entire generations to promises that can no longer be fulfilled. Debt has become the oxygen of the system, but it is toxic oxygen. It keeps economies alive while slowly suffocating them from within. Governments borrow to maintain political calm. Corporations borrow to buy time. And citizens borrow to survive inflation that erodes the meaning of their work. This is not growth. This is anesthesia. The Western financial machine has created a world where prosperity is borrowed, not built, and where the next crisis is always just another interest rate away. In the early decades after World War II, Debt was a tool for expansion. It built highways, schools, factories, and homes. It was the fuel of reconstruction and optimism. But as the decades passed, the purpose of borrowing shifted. It became the mechanism not for building, but for maintaining an unsustainable standard of living. When industries declined, debt filled the gap. When productivity stagnated, credit disguised the problem. When wages froze, loans offered comfort. Governments discovered that they could buy loyalty with borrowed money. Corporations learned that they could inflate value with leverage, and individuals found that they could postpone reality through credit cards and mortgages. This collective delusion became a culture, a system, a way of life. Debt is not inherently evil. It becomes dangerous when it replaces productivity as the engine of wealth. When a nation borrows to invest, it grows stronger. When it borrows to consume, it grows weaker. The Western world crossed that line decades ago. Instead of borrowing to build industries, it borrowed to build lifestyles. Instead of financing future innovation, it financed present comfort. The cycle became self-reinforcing. Every time the economy slowed, interest rates were cut. Every time markets wavered, liquidity was injected. It created a generation of investors and policymakers conditioned to believe that risk does not exist and that growth is guaranteed by central banks. But every bailout, every stimulus, every rescue has a cost. It transfers wealth from the future to the present, from producers to consumers, from builders to speculators. At the heart of this cycle lies the silent corruption of values. Debt teaches impatience. It replaces the discipline of earning with the illusion of entitlement. It encourages consumption before creation, reward before effort, luxury before labor. When societies internalize this psychology, productivity declines because the incentive to work for the long term disappears. Innovation becomes incremental, businesses become risk-averse, and governments become more interested in survival than transformation. Debt gives the illusion of wealth, but not the foundation of it. The real danger is not bankruptcy, it is dependency. A debt-dependent society loses the courage to reform because reform requires short-term pain. And when pain is politically impossible, collapse becomes inevitable. The second half of this equation is digital power, the new form of wealth in the 21st century. As the West drowns in financial obligations, the next global divide is emerging, not in money but in data. The digital economy has become the new battlefield for sovereignty, and those who control it will control the future. Data is the new oil, algorithms are the new factories, and networks are the new railroads. Yet the West's digital empire is fragmented and complacent. It built the platforms, but lost control over the infrastructure. It owns the brands, but not the bandwidth. The rise of the digital economy was supposed to ensure Western dominance for another century, but instead it has revealed another form of dependency, not on production this time, but on connectivity. The West's digital divide is not only external between nations, but internal between classes. The upper tier of society lives in a world of data abundance, AI tools, smart systems, and infinite connectivity. The lower tier lives in the remnants of the industrial age, rising rents, stagnant wages, and limited access to the digital future. This gap is more dangerous than the old wealth gap because it separates not just income but opportunity. The digital revolution has created new elites who can multiply wealth through information while the majority struggle to adapt to an economy that no longer values their skills. When technology becomes concentrated in the hands of the few, it stops being liberation and becomes leverage. The result is a digital aristocracy supported by an indebted majority. Governments, once the regulators of wealth, are now the borrowers of last resort. They issue debt to fund promises that technology cannot replace social welfare, pensions, healthcare, and subsidies to offset automation's impact on jobs. This cycle feeds itself. The more technology displaces traditional work, the more welfare spending rises, and the more debt accumulates to pay for it. The irony is brutal technology that was meant to increase efficiency has exposed inefficiency at the core of modern governance. The West celebrates innovation, but cannot manage its consequences. The same algorithms that drive growth also accelerate inequality. The same data that powers progress also consolidates control. In this way, the digital divide mirrors the debt trap. Both create dependence disguised as empowerment. At the macro level, this combination of financial and digital imbalance is eroding sovereignty itself. Nations that rely on foreign capital lose policy freedom, and nations that rely on foreign data lose strategic freedom. The Western economies are now experiencing both. They must borrow from abroad to sustain domestic consumption, and they must depend on global supply chains to sustain their digital ecosystems. The illusion of independence persists, but the foundation of power has shifted. The future is being coded elsewhere, and the balance sheets of tomorrow are being written in data centers beyond their borders. A country that cannot produce its own goods or protect its own information is not sovereign. It is a client of the system it once designed. The social consequences are already visible. Inflation has turned debt into chains, especially for the middle class. Every interest rate hike exposes the fragility of millions of households that were told homeownership and education were safe investments. Meanwhile, corporations with access to cheap credit continue to consolidate industries, buying competitors and automating labor. This widens the gap between capital and work, between the few who borrow to expand and the many who borrow to survive. The digital divide deepens it further by rewarding those who control networks over those who operate within them. The result is an economy where wealth is generated not by effort, but by access to information, to credit, to influence. Even culture reflects this dependency. Success is now measured by visibility rather than value, followers rather than innovation, hype rather than heritage. The economy of attention mirrors the economy of debt. Both thrive on short-term gratification. Every click is borrowed time. Every viral moment is a loan on future relevance. Just as financial debt traps nations, digital addiction traps minds. Both systems promise freedom while enforcing dependence. Both give more to those who already have enough and take more from those who have none. And both are sustained by the illusion that they are unavoidable. The true cost of the debt trap and the digital divide is not just economic. It is existential. When people no longer believe that effort leads to improvement, when they feel that the system rewards manipulation over creation, they lose faith in progress itself. The foundation of Western prosperity was built on belief. The belief that work, discipline, and innovation could change destiny. That belief is now replaced by cynicism and dependence. An economy can survive inflation, unemployment, or even recession, but it cannot survive when its people stop believing that it can produce value without borrowing it from the future. The West has reached a point where money is printed faster than meaning is created, and information spreads faster than truth can follow. In that imbalance lies the quiet end of an era, an economy trapped between the debts of its past and the data of its future. Every civilization reaches a moment when it must decide whether to evolve or vanish. And for the Western world, that moment is now. The illusion of infinite prosperity built upon the foundations of consumption, credit, and digital dominance has reached its natural limit. The alarm has already sounded in the inflation that refuses to fade, in the supply chains that fracture under stress, in the societies divided between abundance and anxiety. The question is no longer whether the system will change, but whether it will collapse before learning how to create again. The world is entering a new era, one defined not by who consumes the most, but by who produces the most value, intellectual, technological, and human. The West's final alarm is a call to remember what it once knew, that real wealth is born from making, not taking. Creation has always been the soul of progress. The great revolutions of the past, industrial, scientific, and digital, were not accidents of history, but outcomes of relentless curiosity and disciplined effort. The Western world once led those revolutions because it understood the connection between imagination and execution. It did not just dream of steam engines, it built them. It did not just theorize about electricity, it wired the world with it. But as prosperity grew comfortable, creation became secondary to consumption. The balance shifted from production to marketing, from invention to speculation, from purpose to profit. A civilization that stops creating eventually begins decaying, no matter how advanced its technology or how rich its markets appear. The final alarm is not merely economic. It is psychological and cultural. For decades, the Western mindset has been trained to chase growth through consumption rather than creation. People are taught to buy, not to build, to demand, not to design. Success is measured by accumulation, not by contribution, innovation. Once a matter of necessity has become a luxury reserved for venture capital and elite institutions. This inversion of values has hollowed out the foundation of the Western spirit, the belief that human ingenuity can solve any problem through work, discipline, and persistence. The future cannot be inherited by those who outsource their imagination. The global economy has already begun rewarding those who still create. Nations that produce energy, food, technology, and infrastructure now hold the levers of power. Those that produce only debt and entertainment are learning the limits of influence. The balance of power has shifted from the consumer to the creator, from the marketer to the manufacturer, from the speculator to the builder. The new world order will not be decided by who dominates finance, but by who dominates fabrication, both physical and digital. The West's challenge is not external competition, but internal complacency. It must rediscover the art of building, of learning, of working with patience and precision, rather than expecting the world to maintain its privileges indefinitely. The rise of emerging economies has made this truth unavoidable. They are not just cheaper alternatives. They are faster, hungrier, and more focused. They think in decades, not quarters. They invest in education, infrastructure, and long-term innovation. While Western societies debate culture wars, others are building supercomputers, green cities, and digital currencies. The discipline of creation is not glamorous, but it is powerful. The West once embodied that discipline in the factories of Manchester, the laboratories of Germany, the workshops of Italy, and the research centers of California. That energy, that relentless commitment to invention has now been replaced by the comfort of consumption. The alarm is ringing to remind the world that comfort without contribution breeds decline. The West's economic system, once built around competition and innovation, has turned inward. It now rewards preservation over progress. Bureaucracy stifles creativity, and regulation replaces risk. The entrepreneurial spirit that once defined the Western character is smothered by fear of failure and obsession with safety. But creation cannot exist without chaos. Invention cannot thrive without uncertainty. Every great breakthrough in history came from those willing to fail repeatedly until they built something that lasted. The final alarm is not calling for stability. It is demanding courage. Without the courage to experiment, economies stagnate and societies crumble beneath their own convenience. Technology alone will not save the West. Artificial intelligence, automation, and digital networks can amplify productivity, but they cannot replace the human instinct to create meaning. Machines can build faster, but they cannot dream. Algorithms can analyze, but they cannot imagine. The civilizations that will lead the future are those that balance the efficiency of machines with the creativity of humans. The West's greatest mistake has been to assume that technological dominance equals cultural resilience. But when people stop creating, machines inherit a hollow world. Technology must serve creation, not replace it. The power of progress lies not in the tools we use, but in the minds that direct them. Education is the foundation of creation. Yet even here, the West is losing ground. The obsession with credentials has replaced the hunger for knowledge. Schools produce employees, not inventors, analysts, not artists, managers, not makers. The spirit of curiosity that once drove discovery has been diluted by systems that reward conformity over imagination. The future will not belong to those who memorize what exists, but to those who imagine what does not. If education does not rekindle the spark of creation, innovation will migrate to the places that still nurture it. Knowledge must once again be treated as a sacred tool, not a commodity, traded for salary. The cultural transformation required is deeper than policy. It demands a return to humility, the recognition that wealth without work, growth without grounding, and comfort without creativity are illusions. True creation is born from struggle. The Western world rose to power not because it was rich, but because it was restless. It built cathedrals, ships, machines, and dreams through centuries of effort and sacrifice. The same energy must return, not through nostalgia, but through renewal. Creation is not about repeating the past, but reinventing it. It means questioning every assumption, rethinking every process, and rebuilding from the ground up with courage rather than fear. At its core, the final alarm is a moral reckoning. The purpose of wealth is not luxury, but legacy. When wealth becomes detached from purpose, it collapses into decadence. The West must remember that prosperity without production is temporary, and comfort without contribution is decay disguised as success. The civilizations that endure are those that continuously create meaning through art, through science, through enterprise, through service. The alarm is not a punishment, but an invitation to rediscover the source of real power, the power to imagine, to build, and to renew. Creation is not a strategy. It is a way of life. It is the choice to build something valuable instead of consuming something convenient. It is the discipline to plant seeds that may not bloom in one's lifetime. It is the willingness to sacrifice short-term satisfaction for long-term strength. The final alarm is not about economics alone. It is about survival, identity, and destiny. A civilization that forgets how to create will eventually forget why it exists. The West stands at that threshold, staring into the mirror of its own achievements, uncertain whether it can still build what it once dreamed. The choice before it is not between profit and loss, but between relevance and irrelevance, between creation and collapse.